if someone wants it bad enough, they know what the advice is. You keep after it until they slam the door finally and bolt it 3 ways. Because if there's a way to do it, you keep asking. And that's why I have 3 sons of my own, and I've encouraged, I would say, a little for each of them to go serve in some capacity. And if so, do it in the military, and if so, do it in aviation, because it's awesome. But then I turn around and tell them, and I tell people who reach out to the show, hey, if you don't want it real bad, you're not going to suffer through all the crap. And you probably know too from your own experience, Rain, because there's the late nights, the early mornings, there's the setbacks, there's the deployments, the hardships, there's the watching your buddies die in some cases. It's a lot. And if you're not doing it for yourself, then don't bother, because you'll probably drop out the first chance you get.
Tower, Delaware Station is released to you, runway 4 left, wind 040 at 5, clear for takeoff.
Seat tied, altimeter 0 eyes, we're clear for takeoff, clear for the airspace. Driver check 2. My brand ramp curve was at 354. So yeah, that's on. Next, picture 16, 15,000, and I'll give you some of that. Driver on target.
Jell-O, thanks for joining me on the podcast. This has been a long time coming. I know we're both busy probably doing podcasts. If people listen to the show, they probably heard the promo, but that you have a book that just came out recently. We just wrapped up our seed series, but we wanted to get that out there a few weeks ago. And I'm excited to have you on here. And I will say, for those listening, you probably know the Fighter Pilot Podcast, because again, I think you probably found the Afterburn Podcast through that. You were really kind when I first started. And I think this is a testament to you as a person, but you reached out when you heard I was starting a podcast and you offered up any advice and help. And that was not universal. Okay. There are some other people out there who I think maybe saw it as a threat or competition, but you reached out and gave a lot of good point outs and have helped me along the way. So I'm grateful for that. And I'm happy to finally sit down with you and hear a little bit about Jell-O, your story from beginning to the end with your Navy career and what you're doing today. So thanks again for joining me on the podcast.
You're welcome, Rain. And as we spoke about on the little short we did on the Fighter Pilot Podcast when you first got started, I confessed then what I will reconfess now, which is when I watched your social media, I think it was Instagram at the time, announcement, there was my initial response, I'll be honest, was, crap. But then, as I sometimes do, and I've learned this finally through many years of marriage, is, okay, well, what's the opposite reaction of that? And the opposite is to embrace it and say, hey, here's another guy. He's not taking from the pie. He's just lighting more candles on top of the pie. And there's plenty of room for candles and flame and all that. And so I don't know if that analogy works, but the point being, someone who listens to me can still listen to you and vice versa. And so, yeah, I decided to take the opposite response and say, hey, man, been doing this a little while, a couple pitfalls you can avoid, let me know. And I'm ultimately glad I did. And I wish the rest of the world would do that more often in various things.
Yeah, I think coming out of the fighter pilot world, that's definitely, or just aviation in general, the steel sharpened steel. And I like your analogy, just putting more candles on top. I've been fortunate along the way too, help some buddies who start podcasts, and you could interview someone, I could interview someone, and they're going to be most likely completely different interviews. And again, if you like this type of content, probably can't get enough of it. And you can't generate enough, I can't generate enough, so collective effort there. So I do appreciate that. And again, I think that's a testament to just your personality and mentality, which, as you've alluded to, it'd be kind of nice if everyone took that approach. Yeah. I think we'd be a lot better. So thank you again for that. But Jell-O, I like to kick it off. Where did this all begin for you? Again, you got your book out, which I think this might chronological and kind of go through because it's my normal kind of podcast flow. But how'd you get interested in flying in the first place?
Well, I was one of 4 kids, and my mom had recently divorced my dad. We were living in the San Fernando Valley in California, and my mom was looking for a wingman, I think is fair to say, to help out with 4 kids. And she was an immigrant. And so, she's like, hey, this is harder alone. And she met my stepdad. And my stepdad was the son of an Army officer who Jim is his name, has engineering inclinations, and he had been raised around military bases. We had no familiarity with it. And so he loaded us up all in the wood-paneled station wagon one day and drove us out in November of 1978, Rain, to the Naval Air Station Point Mugu Air Show. And I was 8 years old. And I was smitten. I mean, come on, there's loud noises, there's fast moving things, there's ice cream, there's, these larger than life pilots. And so I was just smitten. And I won't say from that day forward, it was like, I'm going to be a fighter pilot and nothing else matters. But then fast forward to high school, my stepdad, Jim, sat me down and said, hey, you're going to be out of high school soon. What do you think you want to do? And I said, I don't know. What does any 16-year-old say? He wants a driver's license and a girlfriend probably. But he asked the right questions and got me started, essentially, aimed my vector towards being a naval aviator. And so I owe a lot of my success to my stepdad, Jim. And so, but I will tell you this too, Rain, that air show, and I was able to corroborate this with one of my fighter pilot podcast listeners. They fired an AIM-9 Sidewinder as part of the show. I can barely remember it. Yeah, no, I barely remember it in my mind's eye. And I had a listener come on and say, oh yeah, I was there. And I remember they used to do that in the 70s. So no, that you can't imagine that today, can you?
Could you? No, I cannot. I mean, it was a huge deal if you use flares in an air show. I remember that was just, oh man, wow, you're going to start a forest fire. Could you imagine ripping off an AIM-9 in front of 100,000 people? Man.
Well, I can remember, I don't know what kind of plane dropped like a Lu-2. I don't know if you guys call that the same thing, the parachute flare.
Yeah.
And then got the heck out of the way. And then an F-4 Phantom came in from east to west because we were right there on the Pacific Ocean. And I just remember this little bright light going from the F-4 to this little light hanging in the little black cloud. And I thought, what the heck just happened? And everyone erupted and in applause. It was amazing. But yeah, they don't do that anymore.
No, I have talked to some of my mentors who they're ripping around in the 60s and 70s flying fighters and go fly over the Air Force Academy or whatever, Base X. Yeah, just go supersonic, bust out a bunch of windows. Like, hey, that's completely fine. Like America.
The world has changed.
Yeah, slightly. Now we're worried about noise abatement and all sorts of things, encroachment on bases. It's just,
of course.
What can you do? Yeah,
Right.
Interesting. And I'm sure, again, a lot of people who are kind of like us have some kind of inspiration in their life early on that drives us down that path. And I think maybe puts the bumpers up there to guide you through those teenage years to get you. Because I always say the runway's short. And if you're not doing all the right things, it gets just exponentially more and more difficult to land a spot in pilot training. The later you get in life, I mean, it's the nature of the beast. It's meant for someone coming out of high school, going into the academy, going ROTC, get a degree, OTS. I mean, not saying you can't do it. So having someone at that point early in life is so critical, or you just got to be really dedicated, which, I mean, I would not have been had I not had some guide rails getting me along the way. So that kind of leads me, I didn't mention at the beginning, but almost 20 years nonstop flying in the Navy as a fighter pilot, almost 3,000 hours in the Hornet. Again, then you got to fly the greatest fighter on earth, the F-16. I meant to ask at the beginning, how many landings on the boat do you have? I know every naval aviator has to know this number.
Oh, I do. And it's 705. And I would say successful landings because I also have about 30 plus bolters, which is where you miss all the wires, and a handful of wave offs, which in many cases, my wheels never touch the deck. So, yeah, I mean, right in the old days, and I'll caveat that and come back to it in a second, that was a mark of what distinguished me from you as a Navy and an Air Force pilot. And I'll come back to the point, which is now this precision landing mode. And I speak quite frequently about this on the Fighter Pilot podcast. Evidently, it's easy now, Rain. I mean, and not to insult you, but an Air Force guy, you could go do probably a week of simulators and a flight or two and go straight to the boat. And in the old days, I would say, oh, well, it would take you, 6 months or a year. Yeah. And so now apparently you put the thing on the thing and you land and it's not that hard. So my identity at this point in my life is shattered.
Shatters his whole life crisis. But I mean, that's a good discussion point. I mean, that's what you want ultimately, because now let's say that, I don't know, that took up 30% of your training time focused on landing on the boat. Now you can focus that other 30% or probably 25% on tactics. You got to be able to land on the boat. Yeah. But yeah, being able to focus on the tactics is the main thing.
And to balance that line, whenever people would ask me on my show, who's better, Navy or Air Force, I would sidestep it and say, the Navy spends a lot of time on pure airmanship because of landing on the boat. But that time we spend, the Air Force is spending on tactics. And so I think if you were to try to generalize the two, that was the case. And now, to your point, they have reduced the FCLP's, field carrier landing practice, way down. And in fact, some flight students aren't even going to the boat as part of their winging or training. They go after. So yeah, it's crazy. It's, again, for me, it's this 1,000-pound elephant that's always been in the room. And one day someone just came and put a collar around him and walked him out. And now I don't know what to do with all the space in the room.
I mean, but this be interesting to get your take on. As technology evolves, the fight evolves, the threats evolve, but leveraging technology and enhancing your capabilities, I think, is an important thing. But then there's this fine balance. And I've never flown the F-35. I got a lot of buddies flying the F-35. They sound like some of the struggles today, maybe the basics, such as flying in close formation, because you don't need to be close in the F-35, except for rare circumstances. But it's like that airmanship, it gets dropped off or it gets traded for different bits and pieces. Yeah. A wingman in an F-35 might be equivalent as far as running the tactics as a four-ship flight lead in the Hornet or the Viper, but maybe they don't have the depth of airmanship. They haven't been painted into the corner and had a bad day just yet. But what are your thoughts when it comes to that balance?
I think you make a good point, and I think that's why it's on us to spend every opportunity we can if this is your chosen profession. And if, oh, by the way, you're a baseball player, maybe it's going to the batting cage. But for us, it's what can I do to make myself better today? Is it going in the simulator? Is it studying the threat? Is it sitting around sometimes, Rain, I bet you can appreciate this, with your buddies in a ready room or at the bar? You got to be careful at the bar. And talking about what would you do if your engine failed at this point? Or what would you do if this was the threat or the picture that the enemy was presenting to you? And so I think you just have to continually hone your skill. And just, we both now fly a little slower airplanes. I frequently, when the weather's good and I'm familiar with the airfield, turn off the flight director and a lot of the automation for my 757 and 767 and just look outside. I can still see the raw ILS data, but I look outside at the runway and the PAPIs or VASIs or whatever I've got and just try to fly the thing, because someday when the automation isn't available, I want those skills. And you can't do it, as we learned from Sully, right? The moment it happens, you can't hope you can pull out the book and read it right then and there. You got to know what you're doing and be able to do it when the pop quiz is delivered. So I think it's on us to just continue to make ourselves as sharp as possible.
Yeah, love it. All right, excellent diversion there. But now jumping back, so obviously you're inspired as a young kid. Talk to me through getting into ROTC, what your kind of your path was into naval aviation.
Sure. Well, of course, as soon as my stepdad encouraged me, I had my own little personal montage, if you will, if those things really exist outside of the movies. But I suddenly cared about grades, cared about the SAT and the ACT and these other standardized tests. And I was of average intellect and still am, frankly. And so I wasn't particularly terrific at my schooling, although I tried harder from that point. And I didn't do real well on the SAT, but I applied to the Naval Academy because I thought maybe this is the path for me. And they sent me a letter, and Rain, I wish I'd kept it, because the wording I recall, now I was 16 or 17 or whatever, but it's something like, thanks for your interest. You don't qualify, nor do you qualify for the prep school, so see you later, A little more polite than that. But I said, all right, gosh, that sucks, but now what? And so I had just always said Academy, ROTC, OCS, OTS as you would call it, because I figured Academy was the best way to go, plus they'll pay you. ROTC, well, you got to get into a school and the program. And then OCS, you got to pay for college, which we weren't rich, but we weren't poor. And I thought, well, I'll just take the help if I can get it. So it didn't work out right away to go to a school with ROTC. I had to transfer as a junior to UCLA, and I was able to pick up a 2-year scholarship and then was commissioned in 1992. And at that time, Rain, there was still a lot of tail end of the post Top Gun, the movie, fighter pilot wannabes out there. So it was a year wait from when I was commissioned until when I started flight school. Also
in that time period, you have the drawdown from Desert Storm. So I would imagine even getting a pilot training slot, or potentially even, we call them reduction in force in the Air Force. I'm sure that's, I think, DOD wide or government wide, but where people, hey, maybe you go through a commissioning program, but we don't need you on the back end. So see you later. Am I accurate in those assumptions?
You are. And there were people that were sent off to be surface warfare officers instead. I had heard stories that didn't happen to me, but at one point they'd get a group of people in, bring them in the classroom and say, congratulations, you're all doing something other than aviation. Here's your options, pick and go. For me, it was just a year-long sit and wait. And I was grateful for that, but obviously I would have liked to have started sooner, but hey, it is what it is. And that year gave me a chance to, number one, have some fun in Pensacola, Florida, which isn't a bad place to be stuck for a year. Number two, I met my now wife, which was fun. And number three, I was able to study ahead because again, for me, things never just seem to come easy. I mean, some things are easier than others, but I'm not like, and you've probably got the friends too, who are like, good grief, this guy's just good at everything. And darn it, he's good looking too. It's like, golly. So I was the guy I had to read everything 3 times because I don't remember it the first time, and then just try hard. And then, you think you know something, you go to do it and you just fail and you don't even know why.
Yeah. And I'm like you. I think I'm a solid average, and I have to read things multiple times, and I usually have to experience it and mess it up at least once or twice. Like, I know how to execute this maneuver. Go out there and it's like, that was abysmal. But after like 3 reps, like I'm pretty solid. But again, it's a solid average. You also had a medical issue that almost derailed you in college. Did you not?
I did, yeah. So when I was 12 years old, actually probably when I was 11, I don't know if you had one of these at your schools, but like a little audiology van would pull up one day and all the kids would go and take a hearing test. And I sat there pushing the button thinking, oh, they really like my right ear. And lo and behold, my left just was blocked by this cholesteatoma, I think it was called, a little skin-lined cyst in my ear canal. And it was a fairly simple remedy. But all of a sudden, the Navy got a hold of that in my ROTC physical. And they said, oh, you're not fit for service. And I mean, imagine you're in my case, 20 years old, I guess. I just gotten to UCLA, just gotten into the Navy ROTC, and I get this letter just unceremoniously in my mailbox in the wardroom. And I'm like, well, gee, that sucks, which is an understatement. Yeah. And a little bit of fighting and clawing and a month of limbo. And finally they turned around and said, oh yeah, you're fine. I'm like, well, thanks a lot. It's like, you think you would just be happy, but I was pissed. It's like, come on, man, you can't just mess with me like that. But as it turns out, if you're familiar with the concept of Chekhov's gun, which is the idea that in a movie or in a story, if they show you a gun in the beginning, they're going to use it later. Well, that ended up in my own book through the Yellow Visor, the Chekhov's gun of later when I had the rather significant medical situation when I was 39. But it was just, I was finally where I wanted to be, and they messed with me for about a month and then decided, oh yeah, I guess you're fine. So at first I thought I couldn't even be in the Navy with that. And then they decided, okay, yeah, you're okay.
Well, it's nice it resolved. I'm sure you have a lot of listeners who reach out to you. I mean, I get a lot who are, they're just on their journey, starting their journey for aviation, and they hit a roadblock. When it comes to, medical is usually the one, and they're having to deal with waivers. Do you have any advice for someone who might find themselves in a situation like you did, or one of these people again who are just now starting their journey and they get some bad news?
Yeah, but I think it's a good question, Rain. But I'll sort of in a way poo-poo it, because if someone wants it bad enough, they know what the advice is. You keep after it until they slam the door finally and bolt it 3 ways. Because if there's a way to do it, you keep asking. And that's why I have 3 sons of my own, and I've encouraged, I would say, a little for each of them to go serve in some capacity. And if so, do it in the military. And if so, do it in aviation, because it's awesome. But then I turn around and tell them, and I tell people who reach out to the show, hey, if you don't want it real bad, you're not going to suffer through all the crap. And you probably know too from your own experience, Rain, because there's the late nights, the early mornings, there's the setbacks, there's the deployments, the hardships, there's the watching your buddies die in some cases. It's a lot. And if you're not doing it for yourself, then don't bother, because you'll probably drop out the first chance you get. So that's my point is, if you're facing something like that, I don't want to tell you to be tenacious, because if you want it bad enough, you're going to be. But ultimately, for me, that's what it came down to, is just persisting. Say, hey, what's it going to take for me to convince you, Navy, that this ear thing is not a problem? Because I'll go to the ends of the earth. I've got nothing else I want to do but try to be a naval aviator. And so I think that just comes, dare I say, somewhat naturally. And if someone is just there because maybe it's a good idea, they may not do that. And I can't really tell them to do it because they're going to, right, just want to do it to their level.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of phrasing it. And that's the story. And that's, I guess, a good way of putting it. You either have it or you don't. Like, if you really want it, like, you're just going to get after it. I had Muttley, who's a Black Hawk pilot, and he has a very similar story of some setbacks trying to get through. And his, actually, it wasn't medical, but tattoo waivers, ironically enough. He's like, I made some poor decisions as a young guy. But he going to the ends of the earth to get to yes is what it takes there.
Yeah.
All right, Jell-O, flight school for you. How was naval flight school for you?
Well, I'll tell you this, Rain. Multiple choice tests are easy if you have the gouge. And I don't know if you guys use that same term. I'm guessing you do.
Very
right?
familiar.
You get the bank of questions, you get the pass down from people, you study and you study and you study. And I remember getting ready for the ATP was similar to this. And so those were easy. I mean, I made it through my pre-indoctrination finishing second because I missed one question on however many tests, and a buddy of mine didn't miss any. And then again, in the academics in my first airplane, the T-34C Turbo Mentor, it was the same thing. It's academics, it's multiple choice. Well, that was great, but it also set me up for thinking, oh, hey, I got this. and then you have to invoke things you've learned in the simulator with stick and throttle in hand. And even in the simulator, that's not even the fear of hurting yourself. And maddeningly, there were certain things I just could not remember, or I just could not do. So I started off great, like a lot of people at a marathon, and then you just kind of slow down and things hurt. And I did well enough in the T-34 to be selected for jets, which was great. And then my first jet, the T-2C Buckeye, I was terrible at landing. I mean, you would think it's not that hard. It's very basic. Well, what they did was they changed the way we landed in the T2 to be ready to land on a carrier. Although by then the Buckeye never went to the boat like it used to. And then in the A4, which I had a chance to fly, the TA4J specifically, I could not bomb to save my life, Rain. I just, like, you were supposed to get yourself in a particular piece of sky at the right dive angle, the right altitude, speed, and all these things. And if you're not, then there's these rules of thumb for making a quick correction to either pickle high or pickle low or a little rudder or whatever. I just could not do it. It's like asking an old Commodore 64 to do what our iPhones do these days or something. And so I was pretty miserable the further along I got. And I barely carrier qualified. I needed a 2.5 grade average, and I think I ended up with a 2.53. And thank God I still made it to jets, still made it to F-18s, and I did well later. I was able to go to TopGun and ended up squeaking into the top 10 ball flyers a couple times later in my career. But it was difficult. And again, I just decided, what else am I going to do? I mean, I'm not going to not try hard. This is what I want to do with my life. And yeah, it sucks. Other guys make it look easy, but I'll just keep trying until I either figure it out or they wash me out.
The Navy obviously as we alluded to early, landing on the boat, very important and very critical. Got to be able to do that. And obviously without the magic carpet back in the day, very critical. What was the flow? Because you can wash out of training at different points for landing, correct? Like at least in your day where like it completely derail you, or like I've even heard of guys who like started the Hornet and then they go to the boat, I guess based on when it's available, and they don't make it at the boat and then done. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and I cannot think of a particular person that happened to, but I remember that being basically the threat. And I think it came down to, well, was it just that, or was it that this person was struggling all along and needs to do something other than aviation? And if for some reason, as I recall, if a person just couldn't do that one thing, they might give that person a chance in maybe a patrol plane or helicopters or something else. But again, I mentioned it in my book, Through the Yellow Visor, there was a student in the F-18 You guys, I guess, would call it the RTU. We used to call it the RAG, or now the FRS, Fleet Replacement Squadron, who was washed out, but it wasn't because of performance. It was because he got caught in a lie doing something he wasn't supposed to be doing. And yeah, I highly doubt they sent that individual to another aircraft. In fact, they might have just excused him out of the military at that point. But if you had a good attitude in your efforts and you just couldn't figure something out, they would usually try to work with you.
Yeah, that was my experience as well. It's usually not just one thing, but it's a culmination of a lot of things. Like if you're on that path where it's not going to work out, but the landing piece, obviously you got to be able to land, and the whole
Yeah.
boat thing is another dynamic that's quite a variable that you had to navigate. When you talked about the T2 transition, the challenge you had there, in what regard did they change the profile of how you're landing that you think that made it more challenging for you?
Well, so in the T-34, we landed, as anyone with general aviation experience in your audience can understand, right? You sort of
flare.
set
We
the
call it a flare.
configuration. What's that?
We call it a flare.
A flare, yeah. But also up until that point, and I know how to flare now, Rain. I do fly for Grandma and Grandpa don't like it when I do a carrier landing in my 75. I know your boxes probably don't complain, but mine do. But everything prior to that point is you're trimming it up for an airspeed, and you can kind of fly it like a normal airplane. And I don't mean to oversimplify it. Landing is still a transitionary thing that's, it traditionally is where most mishaps in aviation occur. And we just saw an example of that in Toronto, unfortunately. A carrier landing is different because now you're setting an angle of attack that's optimal for the landing gear and the hook. And then you're trimmed up to that and you're on speed. And then instead of moving the nose to be up or down on glide slope, you're adjusting the throttle. So you're powering up if you're low, or you're cutting a little power. I shouldn't say cutting, but taking a little power off if you're high. And then because we're always training, even at the field, for the carrier, which, and again, you haven't been there, I guess, but you've probably at least seen videos or pictures, it's very narrow. So you've got to be perfectly lined up left and right. And then you can't be too far or too short in the groove, which is that physical distance, which isn't dangerous, but it screws up the pattern because they're trying to hurry up and land everyone so that the carrier is not predictable, or it's not running into an island or traffic channels or something. So it's all very dynamic, and you're expected to do it well. I mean, that's just the standard. And for new pilots, a lot of them, like me, struggle with that. And it's just, again, kind of like what I already told you with the bomb dropping thing. When there's that much stuff going on, and then you're supposed to like invoke something to make a correction if you're not doing it well, which I frequently didn't. It's like, okay, hold on, I need to do this. And until you get that, what is it, magical 10,000 hours, which doesn't really ever apply to aviators, I feel like. But, you've internalized it, you've done simulators, you've done other things to make Malcolm Gladwell happy, that you get that level of experience where that now you don't even really think about it, right? Like when you and I were brand new car drivers, it was everything in your head to just drive the car. Now think about all the things that distract us, which aren't good, but you can do it without really thinking about it.
It's interesting. I've had a couple guys who've been landing signal officers on the podcast, LSOs, and then buddies who've just done it. And talking to them, I'm always impressed of obviously the level of detail from coming up initial, I forget what you call it in the Navy, but the brake, rolling out, everything. I mean, it's timed in a seasoned LSO when someone rolls out on final based on where the deck is. They've already made an assessment if this is going to work or not, and if they can tweak it and correct it. Because all those little details, call them part task trainers. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure you probably use the same term, but like the basic surface attack, dropping bombs, making those little corrections, all that stuff, building the airmanship. I'm interested in it. I like those little details and trying to hone, but it is not an easy thing to just be able to nail it. And again, it takes 10,000 reps or whatever it is to be able to internalize that and recognize where you are in space and make the changes probably without even realizing that you're making the changes.
I will say this, Rain. I have no doubt in my mind that you could have done it, because you would have just applied yourself to it, just like you did whatever path you took instead, and you would have learned it. Now, maybe you would have struggled a little like I did, but you could have done it. And I think that's true. It's a function of what do we devote ourselves to. And for some people, it's military aviation. For other people, it's medicine or an instrument. But I don't doubt at all that you could have come out, and a lot of Air Force guys do, by the way, do exchange tours, and they get the practice they need in an F-18 or whatever they're flying, and they make it work. And I have no doubt you could have too.
Well, no, I'd probably have taken off and never come back, but I just want to do that cat shot. But I did have a buddy who did it, and he has well over 100 landings. And the reason he got it is in the Air Force, we use flight hours to manage the fiscal year and the budget. I think the Navy uses pounds of fuel or gallons of fuel to manage the flight program. And this was back in the day where, hey, we got to get rid of all this fuel. So they're just AB takeoffs out to the water, dumping back, refueling over and over again. But he talked about, he asked his XO, the boat was there, and he just went out one day just doing a bunch of landings, just trying to get over 100. So I think he has 101 landings just so he could say, I have over 100 carrier arrested landings.
He's a centurion.
Yeah, so it still counts. You talk about in your book your Hornet time, and I think in that chapter and the training, that was the best year of your life. Can you dive into that a little deeper?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think my wife is out of earshot, so hopefully she won't mind. We had been living together in sin through flight school, and she was, I won't say tapping the desk, looking expectantly at me, but I made it clear, hey, I'm married to flight school right now. And then I got winged and miraculously got jets, and the story about that, again, is in the book. And then she's like, all right, now you're not married to flight school anymore. I said, no, but I need a break, and I'm going to head out to El Toro when that airfield used to be open. Even though it was a Marine base, they also taught Navy pilots. And just, go do that. And she went and got her master's degree back where she's from. And I was 25 years old. I drove a lifted truck. I was flying a fast airplane. I had a speedy motorcycle. I was in Southern California. It was a great year. I lived it up. And the funny thing is, I was finally where I wanted to be. And even though it was still important to me to do well, I wasn't fretting doing well because it didn't matter my performance in the F-18 FRS for what squadron you got at the end. And so I chilled. And guess what? I did better. It's like, golly, I wish I'd have known that before, because always before you're sweating getting jets or the F-18 or whatever. And it was a great year because it seemed to, for the first time in my life, sort of come naturally. I won't say it was all easy, but it was fun. I learned a lot. I didn't struggle really in any of the phases, including close air support, where our class was pulled into a classroom one day and yelled at because we were dropping without clearance, right? That's like the biggest sin ever, and doing all these other things. And a couple students had instructors put in the back seats, otherwise on solo flights. And I wasn't one of them that got yelled at and seemed to do okay. I seem to remember doing okay at CQ because I don't remember CQ. So I must have qualified all right. And so, yeah, it was just a really good year. And it was also, I think, the culmination of what I'd worked at that point for, almost 10 years for. And I just, again, I was 25. I was healthy and young and flying and partying. So it was good.
Yeah, and that point too, you kind of have some reps and you've been through different syllabi, so you kind of maybe a little bit more comfortable. I feel like I can parallel that a little bit. And then also knowing that in the Air Force, at least, when you get to the FRS, when you get to the FTU, the B course, there's no programmed attrition. Like once you're there, the plan is for you to graduate. At all the stages prior to that, washing people out is part of the program. So we need to attrit the forces before they get, go into the C-17, go into the F-16. But once you're there, the expectation is, all right, you've proven that you're capable of being here, and then you've met the standards for everyone that, you should be able to graduate, which is kind of nice. But again, too, you've just been, man, it's a long road. This is a long journey. Yes. And in this case right here, we're talking about like you're really just starting it because
you are, because you're learning constantly after that, as you well know. But, on my show, I frequently take a page from Waylon Jennings and say, I think a fighter pilot is every bit as professional as a doctor and lawyer and such because of the schooling and everything you need to know to do the job well. So I put it right up there on that same pedestal, but I'm not sure my crusade is getting very far.
Yeah, well, I mean, I believe you. I'm biased, but to be an instructor pilot, to your point, a Hornet instructor pilot or any platform, really, you're probably 6-ish years into your, military aviation career. And like, you're still just barely, you're just barely there. Like you're just learning, if we get to TopGun or to weapons officer, I mean, that's going to medical school and doing residency. I mean, it's not a short journey for sure.
Yeah. And I've never been a doctor, and I don't know very many very well, but I would think like them, or I would think rather, I should say, they, like me, feel like you're always learning in fighter aviation. I mean, even at the end of my career, I would come back from a flight and have learned something. And so I would think for them, it's probably the same way. There's new discoveries about the body. There's new ways to invoke technology to do the things they do. So, and again, I feel like that's part of any profession, is you should be growing.
Walk me through your early years in the Hornet. What were those days like, and what were the deployments? What did it look like?
Sure. So I left VMFAT 101 in El Toro, hoping to go up the street to Lemoore, which isn't particularly a garden spot in California, but it's close to things I liked. And it was in a state that is imperfect, but I understood it's where I was from. And I instead was sent to Jacksonville, Florida, and to VFA 86 on Air Wing 1. And we deployed twice, first on George Washington, and then on John F. Kennedy, which is now being scrapped for metal, sadly. But I'd been to Pensacola. I hadn't been really to Jacksonville much, but I got there, had some flight school friends that were around. And in the end, I'm glad I did, because my now wife was finishing her master's, and she said, well, hey, do you want to meet back up? And I was looking for a house and a roommate, and I said, sure. And so we spent 6 months together. And then I finally had my eyes opened and said, I better get my act together before she gives up on me, because she's a pretty cool chick. So we've been married now. Gosh, I should know the number, but I don't know. I know we had our 25th a couple years back. So
That's
we've
awesome.
been doing great. So from that point of view, it was good, because we ended up together, and I'm glad for that for sure. 2 deployments, like I said. The first one, we were thinking we'll have a love boat cruise, as we call it, bouncing around the Mediterranean, going to all these great places, pull in on Liberty and just party and have fun. Well, this was about the time Saddam Hussein, this was 1997 was my first deployment, was kicking out the UN inspectors, and there was some rhetoric. And so we, after our first port visit to Haifa, Israel, which is unthinkable today, we were sent through the Suez Canal and spent the rest of our time in the Persian Gulf. And then not much was happening, just patrol missions during Operation Southern Watch. But that was interesting, but just a lot of holding and going to the Iron Maiden, right, the KC-135. And then the second deployment was a little more exciting in so much as between my 2 deployments, I don't know if you remember it, they had the Operation Desert Fox, which was like a miniature. You remember that? It was like 98 or 90, 98, I think.
Often forgotten about.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it was pretty limited. I think it was like 72 hours maybe, and they dropped so many bombs, another air wing. But we came back, and they were still giving like an occasional punch, we were, the West, for, hey, you can't do that. And so my one and only ordnance employment in anger happened in December of 1995. We were looking at a puppy paw arrangement of air defense artillery, and one of them started blinking at us. And I just was a foolish, like, oh, that looks like a Mark 76 or a practice munition hitting. So I didn't think anything of it until the flight lead's like, heads up, they're shooting at us. I'm like, oh yeah, that's what that is. Never felt fearful though. And we extended, got permission from Kmart or whoever was the air component commander to come back around and drop a GBU 12 500-pound laser guided bomb on it. And came back and landed and kind of said, oh, that was awesome. But then realized, well, I don't know, was it awesome? I mean, the bomb probably cost more than the gun. And I don't know if there was someone down there just doing what they're told. But, anyway, that was the only weapon I ever employed in anger.
Interesting. Yeah, it's funny. I wish we had saved the HUD tape. 2 buddies of mine, they're out over northern Iraq. And 2 goes, hey, 1, I think they're shooting at you. And he looks, he's like, oh, yeah, they are. And I guess I should start moving my jet. And the funny piece is, like, you think about like how much you train, one's defending, you just start moving your jet and doing stuff. And you're like, oh yeah, I guess they are shooting at me. I guess I should do something. Now it's not always the case. There's some HUD videos out there that made on YouTube. I'm thinking like those Vipers from the early, or I think it's OEF where they're just getting lit up all over
Oh,
the place.
stroke
And,
3.
yeah, everyone's defending. You're like, oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that is not where I want to be in life for sure.
Yeah. No, I had Jeff Tico on the show to talk about that. He was one of the guys in that, and
Okay.
it was a pretty serious deal apparently.
Now, and then again, we have the Seed series that just wrapped up, and listen to these guys from Vietnam, one of which who got, and I'm sure you've had more. It's like guys who got shot at or in an environment where it is a contested environment, different than when I flew around where essentially, I mean, it was a permissive environment with the exception of, oh yeah, maybe ISIS got a AAA. Yeah, they got a Zeus 23 or something. They snapped.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, Rain, I don't know about you, but I probably tend to understate my career. But I have a lot of people on the show that have done, like you just said, some really amazing things. And I always say, I don't consider myself a combat pilot. I mean, yes, I flew 70 whatever missions over Iraq. Most of them were very benign. I dropped one bomb. And frankly, I didn't even have to. I mean, once we extended past the gun that was shooting at us, we could have just as easily sidestepped it and went home. But compared to the guys that were, going downtown or flying in Yankee Station and all that, or certainly opening a couple nights of Desert Storm before they realized, 100 feet at night wasn't a good idea. Those people deserve our respect, but I don't try to put myself on a level with them at all.
No, different. I think a lot of them too would probably attest. Like, there's a lot of, if you want to call it this, right place, right time. If that's what you want to do. But yeah. I had buddies who never deployed because they just happened to always show up at the squadron right as, hey, the lineup has already been made and these guys are going, or whatever it might be, and they just happen to miss the deployment. So, again, depends on how you want to look at right place, right time. But if it's you want to go deploy and do things, there is a little bit of luck in timing with a lot of aviation.
Yeah. Always a bridesmaid, never a bride. For me, it wasn't that I was a warmonger wanting to go kill. I just wanted to know, do I have the right stuff? I mean, we practice and train for this over and over. Well, that's all fine and good, but right, ask any football team that does nothing but scrimmage and run drills. They want to meet another team and play.
You want to be tested. You want to put your skills to use. I think probably some parallels too. I mean, my last deployment was pretty busy. But then you start dropping in the reflection upon it. I was like, some of this, like, do we really need to do this or that? I mean, it does invoke thought. You think more versus when I was going out the door, all I wanted to do was go be tested. I wanted to go do what I had trained to. But then later upon thinking about things, you just reflect more. So,
yeah. And I think, not to go on a tangent, but that's why it's probably good at our age, if I can lump you in with mine, that we're on a more benign type of flying, because those days of wanting to be tested are behind me. I feel like I'm prepared today if I need to be tested, but I'd rather just have an uneventful flight from point A to point B and get everyone where they're going.
Yeah, that's my speed. I don't want to be soaking up SA-20s and SA-10s. Those days are gone. So hats off to the guys and gals who are still out there standing on the line.
Amen.
That's what we need. So you spend, the entire career flying, which is really cool, but you do a couple of ground deployments, which I find interesting. Can we dive into those a little bit?
Yeah, it would be, I think, a little bit misleading to call the first one a deployment. I was a liaison coming off the USS Nimitz now in 2003. We had shown up just after most of the fighting of, golly, what did they call it? Right? It went from Southern Watch to Iraqi Freedom and then New Dawn, I think it was, right? So Iraqi Freedom, Nimitz showed up after most of the fighting. So we were walking the beat, doing the patrols, et cetera. And I had been selected to go into Al Udeid in Qatar and be a liaison at the Combined Air Operations Center. And we had a jet that broke on the tanker that landed in Talil. And it was the night before Nimitz was pulling in for the 4th of July, actually. It was going to have a port visit in Dubai. And they had sent quickly some folks from the ship to try to fix it. And I was one of a few Navy liaisons, and the senior was the XO of another squadron. And I said, hey, why don't I take these E4 and E6 out there, because I can, as a 04, throw my weight around if necessary, get what they need to get this thing fixed. And he said, good idea. So I found myself on a C-130, what I thought going to Talil, but instead we went to Baghdad first, spent about an hour there, which was surreal in 2003 with all the little birds flying around and everything else. But they kept us corralled. They know you guys are getting right back on the C-130. So I'm just watching everything and trying to snap a few pictures. And of all things, I just reached over and picked up a couple pebbles from the gravel there at the transient place and said, all right, these are from Baghdad, which is true, but I could pull some out of my yard and say the same thing.
No one has to know.
Yeah, then we went down to Talil, and long story short, the jet was broken more than these guys were prepared to fix. So we got stuck there over the 4th of July, 2003. There was an A-10 unit that was based there. They took great care of us. They were very generous because we were stuck. So the other pilot, who was a friend of mine, we were actually the two that were flying together when we dropped the bombs in 1999. He was in a different squadron, but I was there to help out. And so the A-10 guys were having a barbecue for Independence Day, took us under their wing, gave us a van and to drive around and just see things. So we bought American flags at the little post exchange and went and took pictures in front of Saddam murals and busted hangars and old dilapidated MiG-21s. And then about a day or two later, when they were trying to get the parts off Nimitz, but the Nimitz was in Dubai and that was a big diplomatic issue, the XOs finally like, hey, Jell-O, just come back on the next rotator. You don't need to be sitting up there, possibly getting rocket attacked or something. So, but it was great. It was a 4th of July I'll never forget. But now the long answer to your short question, that was a few days. But then in 2011, I did volunteer to go spend 6 months in Afghanistan. And we had what we were called individual augmentees. I don't know if you had the same thing, IAs.
Yep.
And I was at a job I frankly detested, a staff job here in San Diego. I was working on an MBA. I was medically down for the reasons I alluded to before. And I was just miserable. And this request after request keep coming by, and we keep telling whoever's asking, no, we're all too important here. And finally one came by that looked kind of cool. Hey, go hang out with a joint special operations force in Bagram and, 6 months, et cetera. And I sort of, I don't know, Rambo-esque, imagine myself calling in airstrikes and maybe I'll get a JTAC qual, right? Joint Terminal Attack Controller. And I'll be running around with these dudes. And no, it was just more PowerPoint, but it was somewhere else. But as long as I had internet, I was able to work on my MBA, which was the biggest thing. Where I lost Husband of the Year nomination honors reign was that I basically, in a fit of just self-agony at the staff job, put in for it before realizing maybe I should ask my wife about this.
Oh, yeah. It's going to someone's going to get it, so I might as well just volunteer. Go ugly early, right? But yeah, I'm sure that one went over real well at the dinner table.
No, it wasn't great. I, like you, I've done a lot of deployments, but I like to tell people I did one engaged, one married, one with one kid, one with two kids, one with three kids. Yeah, this one was all three boys, and we were living here in Coronado, so Beth had a lot of help. But yeah, the boys, especially the older two that had been through a couple. We did the whole daddy dolls, right? You've probably seen or heard of those. And then I had heard from someone, get a bunch of pennies at the bank and figure out how many days you're going to be gone and fill one jar with that many and have an empty jar next to it and let them move a penny every night when they say their prayers. And that helped as well. So it was an interesting deployment. Not supposed to talk much about what I did, but honestly, it was mostly PowerPoint. But it was about cool things other guys were doing. Being on the ground, though, especially watching your boys there take off in the F-16s with burners lit and no other lights at night, just thinking, man, that's why I signed up for aviation. That should be me. But at the time, that was unable to be me.
Well, it takes a team, right? There's all these different components that have to come together, everyone doing their job. And like you alluded to, let's dig into the CAOC, which I have a funny story with that, the Combined Air Operations Center.
Yeah.
So I did a brief 3-week stint there liaising for our squadron. And so I imagine you're probably in the same room or something, probably the exact same room still to this day. But, everyone's got a little desk and a terminal, the F-16 guy, the F-15E guy, the B-1 guy. Mm-hmm. The Navy had just one representative. And he came off the boat and he set 2 desks down. every Air Force guy was miserable. Like, I just want to get back into the fight. I want to get back to my squadron. The Navy guy was ecstatic. He's like, I got Wi-Fi. I got my own room. There's no hot bunking. I know that's not always the case, but 3 beers a day. He was living life. He extended there. He's like, they're going to have to claw me away from this post. So I was like, just different perspectives, right?
It is. And he was probably not a pilot because for carrier qualification, proficiency, and currency, 3 weeks was about the longest we could stay. And then you would have to fly a day trip on the carrier before you're allowed to go at night. And I think even on the day, you're supposed to do like a touch and go or an extra pass. For the NFOs, naval flight officers, that wasn't an issue. So perhaps, but yeah, we don't have alcohol on the carrier because of something that happened in 82. And they do now have Wi-Fi, which a couple sailors have found out the hard way is not a great way to record a mishap and send it out on social media. So that's either good or bad, depending how you look at the internet. But yeah, I mean, it's just a nice break because I always call a carrier a fun prison, particularly for aviators where you can get parole and go fly. It's not like there's working parties, but you're fed whatever they're feeding you, and you're stuck with people that if you don't have good chemistry, you can't get away from. You're within 1,000 feet. So you kind of know it when you sign up for it, I would say.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, if you don't know you're going to be heading out to sea for 9 months or so when you join the Navy, let this be your notice. That's what you're going to do. Top Gun. Talk to me your path to Top Gun and what Top Gun was like and what did you do after you graduated?
Yeah, and if people are watching or listening to this and thinking, oh, I've seen Top Gun and Top Gun Maverick, I know everything about what that's like. No, sorry to say, it's nothing like that.
What?
So when you leave Top Gun, I'll start at the end, you go back to the fleet as a training officer. And you are then the person in charge of making sure everyone is as tactical as possible. Well, the training officer that came to VFA 86, where I was a junior officer, was Chili Winter. And he was amazing dude. I mean, again, like we talked about before, he probably was the guy in flight school who made everything look easy, and darn him was good looking and just, good on the ball and everything. And so he came to VFA 86 and took an interest in everyone and everything. And one day we're sitting around like, Jell-O, what are you going to do after 86? I said, I don't know, don't really want to be a Blue Angel, don't really want to be an astronaut, so I don't want to go to test pilot school. I said, I think what I'd really like, I'm not that good at landing on the boat, so I'm not trying to be an LSO. I said, I think I'd like to be good at the airplane. And he goes, well, you should go to Top Gun. And, when I was a kid, my stepdad first said, you should be a fighter pilot. I remember thinking, that's what other people do. Like, that's not what we do. Or not we, but my brothers and I guess. But I proved that wrong. Like, no, I can do it. And so I had that initial response. Like, I'd seen these guys in Fallon, and they were the Jedis of naval aviation. And I thought, that's somebody else. That's not me. He goes, no, you can do it. And so long story short, I did a few things to throw my hat in the ring. And based on Chili's recommendation alone, according to other bros I've talked to, and a bro is just the term for a Top Gun instructor, they accepted me. And I went and I sat through the academics. And, you probably know this, and I don't know if it's come up on your show. The academics, the way they're presented at the Air Force and the Navy's weapons schools are different. And I don't think ours is better. I just say they're different. But the way that Top Gun does it is you don't look at the slides. You have it all memorized or at least understood so well you don't need to memorize it, but you can still teach it and know what to say. And the fella who, like on day 2, Homie Cedarholm, he's now the 3-star here in Camp Pendleton of all Marines. He had just murder boarded the day before. And his lecture reign was so polished, so free of distractions, that I was distracted thinking, oh crap, what have I done? I can't do this. And so I didn't learn anything about what he was teaching. I just sat there with self-doubt. And then fast forward, 8 months later, I'm standing giving my murder board and I pass and I think, my goodness, how is it a person can do this? And I'm not standing here or sitting here saying, look how great Jell-O was. I'm going to say though, I think it's amazing that the human can give a 2.5, 3.5 hour lecture completely without looking at the slides or notes from I won't even say from memory, but from your being, because you know it so well, because you've committed yourself to doing that. And so for me, it was a real great maturing process, like so much of my career was, because it again erased some self-doubt. Like if you pour yourself into something, you can do it. And that was just, by the way, the lectures. Then there's the flying and all these other things. But that was a really amazing tour.
You probably can relate to this. I was just talking to another FO on this past trip who taught pilot training like me. The one aspect I found really rewarding and very cool was you can take someone right off the street who barely can spell airplane, and then 4 months later, they're flying on the wing 3 feet away from you, solo, in the weather. But it's, I think, a testament to how we've built flight training, the lessons that have been learned in blood, all these things, just kind of a building block approach. That was my takeaway early on. It took me a while to figure this out after someone told me 15 different times, but it's just one step at a time. Now, you might have to be able to do one step at a time, all within a half a millisecond or whatever it might be, but just it's a building block approach for a lot of these programs. And I think the military's done, at least with aviation, they've cracked the code for building aviators, and it comes to building block approach a lot of the times.
I think you're right, Rain, and I'll tell you, I'll try to keep it as quick as possible. A story, it's not totally related, but I think it's kind of important, and maybe your listeners will take some heart out of this. I was at a bar watching a football game with my son and his friend and his friend's dad, who is about mid-50s like me, has not ever been an aviator. But he says to me, hey, I'm thinking about getting an airplane because they've got this one with a parachute, so I can go wherever I want. And even after a beer, I was like, I think that's a really bad idea. And because you can't just get to that level, and you can't just say, I'm just going to use this parachute if I need it. And I tried to explain to him how expensive it is, and it's probably going to total the airplane. And because of that, you'll be reluctant to use it. And because of that, you'll probably fly in conditions where you'll die. And he didn't think much of that, but I haven't heard if he bought it yet or not. And I hope he doesn't. And I don't mean to call him out if he happens to be watching or listening. But yeah, you can't just, to your point, just go do the things that experienced aviators do and expect that you can fake it in a sense because you've got some get out of jail free card. And we all know of doctors and other people that fly when they shouldn't. JFK Jr., maybe, I don't know all the details of that, but I know he killed himself in a general aviation airplane. So yeah, it's serious business.
Well, I am legal to go get out there in a single engine, whatever, and go shoot an ILS. Would I do it? No way. It's like legal versus smart, proficient, all those things come into factor. So yeah, don't go buy a plane and just rely on the parachute. Everything
parachute, Rain.
It's fine. It's fine. Yeah, it's an unforgiving business, but it's like anything. You gotta get the reps. You gotta have the experience, and it takes usually quite a while, and some hard lessons learned occasionally there. What was the most challenging aspect of Top Gun for you?
Well, just like in my history, it was either landings in the T2 or dropping bombs in the TA4. For some reason, I could not get past defensive BFM. And if your listeners and viewers aren't familiar with that, right, you have one-on-one maneuvering, and there's 100 different terms for this. But at least in the Navy, and I assume you guys do something similar, you can start in different positions relative to each other so that you can get certain learning objectives. You said earlier, part task training. So if I start, let's say you and I are going to go BFM or dogfight, ACM, again, whatever you want to call it. If I start behind you on purpose, 3, 2, 1, fights on, well, then I'm offensive, you're defensive. Now, we may not stay that way, depending on how it goes. And if you're behind me, then I might be defensive, you might be offensive. If we meet at a merge, like two cars passing on the highway, well, then we're high aspect. And then you turn and I turn, and we'll see who ends up offensive and defensive, maybe. The defensive is hard, as you know, because you're looking over your shoulder at the other guy, but then you got to look back in to see what your altitude and airspeed. And oh, by the way, you're trying to take snapshots outside in your mind so you can debrief it later and draw all the arrows accurately. And I just was close, but never quite, well, not never, but I was close to the Top Gun standard. And then we'd fly again that day or the next day, and I'd get closer yet. But like, hey, if you're going to wear the patch and instruct in this, you've got to be good at, you've got to reach the threshold, not good enough. You've got to reach the minimum. And it took me 10 tries, Rain, to finally pass defensive BFM. And it wasn't like they were thinking, what do we do selecting Jell-O here? We should go send him down the hall to somewhere else. It was just, hey, when you get it, then you'll get it, and then you can teach it, but not until then. And so once I finally did pass, and I can remember passing, it was very relieving. And it was with a pilot who unfortunately was later killed in a mishap. But I then internalized defensive BFM, and I found that I actually preferred it, because I don't know about you, if I start behind you and I stay behind you, okay, whatever, that's kind of satisfying. But if I start in front of you and end up behind you, that's pretty cool. And if I start neutral and I end up behind you, okay, great, but that means you probably made a mistake. But if I start defensive and I can end up at least neutral, well, then I've done a good job, and it's not at your expense necessarily. So I came to enjoy it. But yeah, defensive BFM was my, once more, what is Jell-O going to suck at? And it just took a little persistence, and I got there.
Well, that might segue into, I believe, the last Navy aircraft you flew, which again was the mighty Viper, as an adversary. So you're out there being the bad guy, and obviously a variety of roles from long range to close in. But let's dig into that just a little bit and talk about your adversary days and what that was like.
Well, so I first went to Top Gun in 2000, stayed till late 2002. And when we were there at the time, Rain, we were told F-16s are coming. Now, those who know naval aviation adversary history, there were F-16Ns purpose-built for the Navy in the 80s. Evidently, those things were rocket ships. We were getting A's and B's, Block 15s. There were 28 that were, as I understand it, supposed to go to Pakistan. Pakistan detonated a nuke because they were at odds with India, and the State Department said, nope, you're not getting those. So they went straight from Dallas area, wherever they make those, I guess Fort Worth, straight to the boneyard, and were preserved. And then the Air Force and the Navy said, hey, we could use those. So as I understand it, you got 14, we got 14, 10 A's, 4 B's, and we turned them into adversaries. We were told the whole time I was there, they're coming. And the first one, I kid you not, showed up the weekend I was leaving. I tried not to look at it. I walked by with the blinders on, damn it.
Yeah.
And but fast forward to 2013, I get my wings back because of the medical thing, which again is sort of the big climax of my book. And I go there and I learn how to fly the F-16 A and B. And then before long was the head of those and an instructor as well. And I tell people, although I have to caveat this, Rain, I tell people I think it's like this. The F-18 is like my wife, trustworthy, I know it real well. It's where I want to be. The F-16, and again, I say I think it's like this because I don't know, was like that hot, a little fling over here. It handles different. It flies different. It smells different. And anyway, again, I hope she's not in the living room over there.
Wait a minute.
Because I only think it's like that. But
It's got in trouble.
It was amazing. I can remember a couple backseat flights because we had meetings to go to or something. I was like, this is cool. And then my first front seat flight, I could have done solo because the instructor, I think he did take the controls just to demonstrate a HAPL or something. But after that much experience flying F-18s, it was just a different place to reach for the stick over to the right instead of two of my legs. And then one engine instead of two, and a few other things. The visibility was amazing. The performance was incredible. But I know you haven't asked this yet, but the biggest change for me, Rain, was, again, dogfighting, BFM, ACM. I'd get over the top and I'd look down at you and I'd say, oh yeah, baby, I've been here before. And I would try to break the damn stick off because I wanted more than the, 26?
AOA limit. Yeah. Limit.
Yeah. And it wouldn't give me a bit more. I was like, come on. All I got to do is point at him right now. The F-18 would give me that all day long. And the F-16 would not. So I had to relearn a little bit of basic dogfighting there.
The AOA, it would be nice just once, like, hey, I want to override this. I know I'm cashing in all my chips, but I would really like to point at this guy and I promise I won't go out of control. Like if I could just have
evidently, it's bad enough if you do that they wouldn't let us. So yeah.
So the engineers were like, no, that's why we
Sorry,
have that. Yeah. You're not going to get this opportunity, which I only got to fight Hornets once doing BFM. And, as my instructor was briefing me everyone has a different game plan, rate fight. Like if you're going to go use the angles, if you're going to use the speed, Viper, we want to stay fast. But when a Hornet turns and points at you across the circle, like it's just like, okay, I got to be calm for a minute. I got to survive this one shot because he just cashed in all his energy and now it's mine. But you got to survive that first shot.
Yeah.
But how many hours did you get flying as an adversary?
Well, as an F-16 adversary, 170. So
okay.
I would not necessarily call myself a combat pilot. I tell people I flew the F-16, but I don't ever say I was a Viper driver. I mean, I just don't think that's for guys like you fair. But I did fly it and I did enjoy it. But yeah, it was 170.
Obviously the mission set for what you were doing, I mean, it's used for a different purpose. Primarily, again, go out there and be a bad guy, give a different presentation. Being able to do dissimilar BFM is so much. I mean, it's great. Not saying it's better, but going out there and actually fighting someone who has a different performance, different airplane versus going F-16 versus F-16, and someone's got to go mil power only to kind of replicate or to change things up, or it's just mano a mano, fly your best machine.
Yep. And in the early F-18, let me rephrase that. In the early TopGun training where I struggled with the defensive, it was in another F-18. It was similar because I think the idea was, hey, we want you to see what can be done here. And if these are equal aircraft, different pilots, and there is an outcome that's not the way we want, well, guess what? We can attribute that to something other than the aircraft.
Yeah, 100%. You exploit the air. You're always exploiting the errors, but if you are on an equal playing field, then it's clearly identified what those errors are. Yeah. And it wasn't a performance of the jet. As we kind of get towards the end here, one, I hope you're willing to hang around for a There I Was story.
Sure.
Again, I'm excited that putting this book together, I know was no small feat. So I do want to kind of hit on some of the highlights of why you decided to write a book. What was the process like? How long did it take?
I decided to write the book, as we talked about in the little book promo you helped me out with the day it launched. Thank you very much. For two main reasons. Well, 2.5. Number one, I had an audience. I had the Fighter Pilot Podcast, and like Captain Miller and Saving Private Ryan, they didn't know my background. And I have this other circle, this story of when I was 39 years old and in the prime of my life, and I had not screened to be the commanding officer of a squadron. And I thought, that's fine. I'm just going to fly my entire career and not have those concerns and all the things that come with command leadership. Well, in the middle of that, I was diagnosed with a life-threatening medical issue. And I not only was pulled right out of the cockpit and into the OR within like a couple days of each other, but then I battled back and found my way back into a cockpit, believe it or not. And so at the time, people were telling me, Jell-O, nobody comes back from that kind of surgery and flies again. And I said, all right, well, I'll let the medical folks tell me that. I'm just going to keep trying. And that's why I ended up in an MBA program also, because I thought, well, shoot, if I get out of the Navy and can't have anything to show for my flying, whether it's airlines or whatever, I'm going to need to look a little better on a resume. So started doing that. And I was glad I did. It was a lot of work, but I now have those letters next to my name. It just that whole story, which I know I'm being a little coy about, but I'm trying to save people to read it because it's a fascinating story, I think. Those two reasons are my biggest reasons for wanting to write a book. If I didn't have a podcast, I don't know that I would have written a book. And if I didn't have that amazing medical thing, I don't know that I would have written a book either. So it was that little 2-circle Venn diagram. And then the half reason is simply, again, as we talked about at the top, one of my personal crusades on the Fighter Pilot Podcast is to just beat back the Hollywood stereotypes of fighter pilots. And I wanted people to see that, no, we're like the guy next door or gal next door. And we don't all have supreme confidence. We're not all perfectly good at everything. And as we've talked about here over the last hour so far, I've struggled and I've had my shortcomings and self-doubt. And that is what a real fighter pilot looks like, not what you see on the silver screen.
Yeah. And this was several years in the making, I would imagine, right?
I don't remember exactly when I started, but I know it was before June 16th, 2021, and that's coming up here on 4 years. So I think it was about 5 years of writing. And I particularly mentioned that date because the book is dedicated to my brother, and that was the day, unfortunately, I lost him. And at the end, there is an afterword that talks about that day. And I'll tell you this, you didn't ask it, but I'll tell you, everyone I think should write their book, including you, Rain. Find an audience and write your book because it is cathartic and it's amazing. It's a journey. But in a similar weird way that, maybe someone stands in front of the mirror and like, if they've been working out, like, oh, I look good, bear with me here. I read the afterword that I wrote. So again, kind of like standing in front of the mirror, and it makes me emotional, which is really bizarre because I wrote it. But it chronicles that day, and the book is dedicated to him, and he shows up a lot in the book. He and I were best friends. People thought we were twins. So, yeah, anyway, about 5 years.
Man, I do remember when you shared that on social media and seeing a picture of your brother. You guys did look exactly alike almost. Man, twins, not a far stretch.
Well, we would, so if we went fly fishing or doing something together, we would sit down at a restaurant, let's say, and, the waitress would come up. Hi guys, how you doing? Hey, are you guys twins? And so as the younger brother, I would always say, no, we're 2 years apart. Who do you think's older? And they would look at him, look at me, look at him, look at me. And I blame it on night traps, Rain, but they'd look at me and say, you.
Dang it.
And I'd say, dang it.
Yeah. Oh, well, what's next for you, the Fighter Pilot Podcast? What are you looking out next couple of years? Well,
I bet you can appreciate this, and I don't know if you're a father. Are you a father?
I am. I got 9 and then 2, 3. Or I got 3.5-year-old twins. I was going to say 2, but yeah.
Gosh.
It's full up. It's full up rounds around here.
So you can appreciate the analogy, and hopefully you would agree. Having a podcast is like having an infant. You're always holding it. You got to feed it. Maybe once in a while you have to clean up after it. It's a lot of work. This infant never grows up. And so I am starting to admit, I guess I'll say, that the podcast has been terrific. And I bet you feel this way too. I meet people who say they listened through college or through flight school. I still get emails from folks who say it was an encouragement to them. I've even received, Rain, emails from spouses that say, my husband said on this road trip we're about to go on that we're going to listen to you the whole time. And I said, oh, geez, and rolled my eyes. But we just got back and I feel like I know you. So thank you. And so I really have received emails like that. But now that the book is out, which I wanted to keep the show going to promote the book, I'm going to start looking to either hand it off or slow it down. I definitely don't want to burn it down. But I think I want to see if I can, and I've already got some guest hosts, but I want to see if I can get someone to take over the holding, the feeding, and the cleaning, going back to my infant analogy. Yeah. And maybe I can stay in the background. I'll do the books or I'll help out with some other stuff or show up once in a while. But when you commit yourself to, and I've done as little as 2 a month, I've done as many as 4, one every Monday. As you know, Rain, it is a lot of work. And I appreciate that it has influenced people's lives. It has made a little money. I will absolutely confess that. That wasn't the goal, but it's a great result. But I can't do it forever. I mean, the hairline is getting further back. The hair that's there is getting more and more silver. So I don't want to be one of these guys that's all white and still talking about, there I was. Although I'll do that for you because I know we have a segment of that coming up.
Yeah, I appreciate it. The one aspect, because this is a tremendous amount of work. I'm probably like you. I've kind of viewed it as now kind of a way of capturing history, little bits and pieces of it, which I like history and I think there's value in it. But man, this thing, it is the beast that you must continually feed.
Yeah, and if I can comment on that, we've been blessed to have, I think, 4 or 5 World War II veterans on the
That's
Fighter
huge.
Pilot podcast, and they are all now gone.
That's and as we go generation by generation, these stories, and now I've kind of said at first there's this aversion for people to come onto a podcast and talk about. Nowadays, I think it's obviously more commonplace. But talking to buddies initially who were my initial first kind of couple guests, like, I don't have anything to say. It's like, well, you do, and everyone has a story. But now too, this is another way of capturing the squadron history. And I've mentioned this on the podcast a couple times. That Soup Campbell, retired A-10 driver, legend in the A-10 community, right?
Yep.
When I interviewed him, I then had my A-10 buddies were like, I always heard the wave tops of Soup's story, but never had heard it. And again, he was a legend. He had been an instructor with them, but those stories just kind of start fading away outside the guys who were deployed or were in the squadron at that time. Just kind of survives 1 or 2 rings. So, just a different form of medium, I think, of capturing history, which I like and I do enjoy. But yeah, you got to feed the beast, that's for sure.
Yeah, no regrets. Like I said, I've just yesterday, a family was vacationing here in San Diego, and the guy listened to the show, and he said, "Hey, can you come meet me? I want to, give you, of all things, some Wagyu beef." Because he's from Idaho, and he raises, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but so he said, bring a cooler. So I brought a cooler and shook his hand and hung out with him and his kids on the beach, and ended up with a cooler full of meat because he found me through the show. So just craziness.
That's awesome. All right. Well, Jell-O, as we wrap up here, is there anything I'm missing? Is there anything I'm not asking you, or is there something you think would be important to get out there?
Well, I think that people thank me for my service, and I thank them for their support. And flying a fighter in the cloth of our nation's military was an honor unlike anything else. And I have grown so much, both through that experience and then talking about it on the show, that for those out there that have big dreams and maybe don't have supreme confidence, chase your dreams, because you can achieve amazing things, and you can learn to have more confidence in yourself as you go. I remember my brothers would always tell me, even towards the end of my career, like, what's with you? Why don't you, talk yourself up more, kind of thing. And it's never been me, but it's amazing to see my story in print. It's amazing to hear myself on the show. And again, that's not an ego thing. It's almost a cathartic thing. It's always incredible, whether it's at the annual Tailhook convention or at air shows or just on email or social media, to hear from the young people and old people. There's a lot of folks out there, Rain, that would have loved to have done what you and I did, but life had another path for them. And so to be able to continue to serve in that way has been amazing, because I think that's one of my love languages is I like to serve. If I go to a party and there's some dishes in the sink, that's what I do. I'll come help in the kitchen or something. But I've been so blessed in so many ways, and I am glad to be able to share that in my book, Through the Yellow Visor, and on the podcast. And I hope people who are frequent listeners of mine aren't freaking out that, no, we're not going to burn it down. We're going to either slow it down or maybe see if we can get someone else to take a lot of the nug work. But dream big and chase your dreams, and don't let people stop you, and don't believe what you see in Hollywood. So I don't know if that's one succinct summary, but I just, our life is more than just a sentence summary. So I guess that's just a few thoughts there.
Yeah, I think that's valid. Well, Through the Yellow Visor, the life and misadventures of a U.S. Navy fighter pilot. That's out now. I think Amazon is probably the best place to get that. I'll have that link down below. So Jell-O, again, thanks for joining me on the podcast. Look forward to talking to you with a There I Was story. And yeah, again, thank you for taking the time.
You're welcome, Rain. I appreciate what you do and your following. And so I appreciate you having me on today.
15,000 and some of that.